Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. The show is brought to you by Game Time, the best ticket app to get all of your seats for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Anything you need tickets for, you go to Game Time. Download the Game Time app today and use the code CLNS to get $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? Game time. All right. Welcome into the Pucks with Haggs podcast. This is the 181st episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I have with me today the Boston Globe's Jim McBride for his first debut episode with us. Jim, how's it going, my friend?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Haggs.
Oh, and thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. We also have, I believe Mick Colageo is going to join us midstream. We'll see when he jumps on. But we can get up. Wait a minute. It's almost like I called that shot. I see Mick Colageo coming in. I see a dark spot where Mick Colageo's name is. So we're going to let Mick get all set up. Jim, just jumping into it, since we already gave love to our awesome sponsors at Game Time, and we'll get right into it. What are you left with after watching 82 games of this Bruins team, watching that final game last night, sort of the vibe in the locker room and sort of, what you're looking forward to, and when you look back to the season, what your thoughts are going into this offseason?
Yeah, I thought Morgan Geeky summed things up pretty well last night. Like, this team was showed that it could be a contender, right around Christmas time. They started to play pretty well. They had that bump after Monty was fired.
Yep.
But they just couldn't find any consistency. Like they'd play a terrible first period, then they'd come back and play a really good second period, and then the next night they'd come out on fire in the first period and play a terrible second period. So they just couldn't find 60 consistent minutes, and that was a problem all season long, even during both coaching stints. I think Monty and Joe Sacco, and I thought Joe was kind of dumped into a really tough situation, and did a pretty admirable job to keep that locker room as close as he could until deadline day when it really exploded.
Yeah, I mean, that was really a thankless job, Joe Sacco taking over, kind of the good soldier, organizational guy. Taking a tough hand. I think he was happy, obviously, to get a head coaching gig again and to do it for the Bruins. Like, there's only so many hockey people that have been able to say they were the head coach of the Bruins, whether it was interim or regular head coach. So that, I totally understand why he took it, but he had to know going in what he was in store for. And I thought he did a great job, same as you. Yeah. Especially like he got them playing after after he took over, the way they were supposed to play and the way they were going to have success. And frankly, the way Jim Montgomery wasn't trying to coach them, because it didn't seem like he adjusted to the personnel that he had. I thought what Joe Sacco was trying to do was the right thing with the personnel that they had and the group that they had. But to your point, the sign of a bad hockey team is when you plug up one leak, another one appears. You fixed one problem and all of a sudden there's two more, and you fix that problem and then there's another one. And, it's taken bad penalties the first half of the year. It's bad special teams. It's the second half of the year. The second period was just atrocious when they had the long change. Defensive issues throughout, like poor goaltending. You can go across the board. There was really nothing they were great at all season long, and there was always problems popping up. Mick, your thoughts just on now that it's over, looking back on that Bruins season and game 82 last night, and sort of the feeling in the locker room afterwards, and where the pieces are going to fall here.
Yeah, sorry, my computer is acting like an old lawnmower, shaking out this, scraping off the wet grass from underneath. Gotten all hardened up under there, putty knife and a hammer. Anyway, I agree with Jim. I think the thing that I will always wonder, things we will never know, file cabinet spot, would be, let's just say after Joe Sacco got his initial bump, nailed down that commitment to the defensive game and simplified their offense. When he made those adjustments and the team bought in and they had that a little adrenaline-fueled stretch, then it became apparent that they were hitting a wall because they could not score. Yeah. And Pasta had yet to really heat up. Geeky had yet to really heat up. and they hit the wall. I thought at that point, it would have been really timely for them to get a Toffoli type winger who could put the puck in the net. And if that player could score 25 times and maybe just change the outcome of 5 games that wound up L's that could have become W's, then that whole narrative of the trade deadline might have been different. But
to what end, though, Mick? You know, to what end?
Well,
to scrape into the playoffs?
I realize
that's your doors blown off. You know,
that's the open-ended question. I get that part, but I wonder if that would have sustained their belief in the 20 plan based on the prior season without Elias Lindholm and without Nikita Zadorov. So coming into it, and a million things went wrong, and they couldn't outrun their mistakes. And once the team hit that wall and realized they can't score, they got frustrated and couldn't play to their identity anymore and sprung those leaks. And it's just one thing begets something else, and they kept figuring out new ways to lose because they kept trying to be greater than what they were.
Yeah,
I'm not sure they had the confidence to grab a guy like Toffoli, because I don't know if they thought they had the assets. Because what they would have had to give up for him was probably someone that was making an impact on the roster, and it would have been a Robin Peter to pay Paul scenario. So it was either the cupboard was kind of dry asset wise to go out and make that move after the moves they made in previous deadlines.
Yeah, for sure, Jim. And I also think they correctly deduced that anything that they invested into this team was going to be wasted assets, that was going to be, throwing good money after bad with what they had and what they were showing this season. Like even early on, Mick, I agree with you that they had times where you're like, they were in the wild card sort of hunt most of the year. And, maybe if they had one piece, it would have put them over the top to be in the playoffs. And,
they were in the playoff 8.
Yeah, they would show fits and starts, and like they were in the playoff spot at Thanksgiving, right? And usually that's the formula to be there at the end, and you're in good standing. But even early in the year and throughout the season, like the no-shows on the road where they would just give up and it would just spiral out of control against them, and they couldn't stop it once it got out of hand, and they would just let it turn into a blowout. That stuff, the really horrible goal differential that they had pretty much all year that, obviously got worse as the year was going on, but was bad from pretty early on, was one of the worst in the NHL, even when they were in the playoff hunt. Like, I think you could see signs even then that this team, something was wrong with them. The way that they were built, some guys were hitting a wall maybe at their age and where they are in their career, and they weren't going to be able to do what they did the year before. And, the center's situation still needed addressing clearly. Like there's a lot going on with this team that they correctly deduced, I think, that this team did not have the right stuff and needed to be broken up. And I will give credit to Don Sweeney and Cam Neely and Charlie Jacobs, obviously, his ownership, for sort of being on board with that part of it and seeing what I think most of us saw, that it was probably time to make some really hard decisions. Krejci, Bergeron retired, Chara retired a few years before. They were able to compete for a few years. They surprised last year with some guys stepping up. But I think they correctly read that this was the year where there was going to be a reckoning, where it was finally like losing all those Hall of Fame players and losing all that top tier talent to retirement and age. They were going to have to do something in order to rebuild it the proper way, instead of trying to slap on free agents and keep the ride going for a while. To that point, I want to read you guys this, and then we'll get into this. Charlie Jacobs this morning sends this out through the Bruins social media accounts. After they send out an email letting all the media know the players are going to be clearing out their lockers on Thursday this week. And then Charlie Jacobs, Cam Neely, and Don Sweeney are going to be speaking next week, per usual, on Wednesday. To our loyal and dedicated fans, the 2024-25 season was undoubtedly one of the most challenging of my tenure with the Boston Bruins. Like you, our diehard fans, I bleed black and gold. Today, I share your disappointment as the team clears out their locker stalls ahead of a long off season. While we have certainly enjoyed some exciting moments this past year, including a centennial game and 100th anniversary celebration for the history books, we ultimately fell far short of expectations. yet your passion never faltered. You showed up and you believed until the final horn. We cannot thank you enough for your support. Simply put, you are the greatest fans in hockey. Over the last decade, hockey operations, on-ice talent, hard work, and commitment brought Bruins hockey to a level of success we are proud of, but we are not satisfied. Our goal of winning another Stanley Cup remains unchanged. It's clear that we have a lot of work to do, and that work is already underway. Despite how difficult it has been to say goodbye to some of our most beloved Bruins this season, these decisions were rooted in the best interest of the future of our franchise. Together with our hockey operations leaders, we are actively preparing for the NHL draft and anticipate a top-tier selection with more draft capital in hand than we have had in recent years. We are also eager to bolster our roster through free agency and open the door for some of our young prospects to take the final steps in their development. There is only one way forward from here. Expectations and accountability are higher than ever. I'm incredibly proud to be a Bostonian. I take even greater pride in being a Boston Bruin. Together with leadership, we are embarking on an ambitious journey to restore glory to this great franchise. Thank you for your unwavering support. Signed, Charlie Jacobs. Jim, what do you make of this? Like, obviously, this is a signal that they're not making any changes. There was Greg Hill was throwing stuff out saying somebody was going to resign on Wednesday. So the Bruins obviously felt like they had to, come out on Wednesday with something. And this is a pretty ironclad, word that the management team is staying together. At least the GM and the president, and they're going to get a chance to right this ship next year. Not surprised. This is kind of what I had heard behind the scenes was going to happen. Don Sweeney's going into the last year of his contract, so he's going to get, this opportunity to right the ship. Now, if it doesn't work, if they don't hit some home runs this offseason with the draft, with free agency, with trades, if there's not tangible evidence of a strong retooling, maybe a la the Washington Capitals a few years ago, it might be a different conversation next year. But I do believe on some level, Jim, that Don Sweeney deserved a chance, given his body of work over the last 10 plus years, to do this the right way.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had a sit down with Charlie Monday this week, and there's a story on the Globe Now. I'll plug myself.
Yes, do it. Plug away, my friend.
Yeah. So, and Charlie, said a lot of the same things that are in that letter. He's disappointed. He's frustrated. He even acknowledged, winning another Stanley Cup while his father is around to enjoy it is a high priority for him.
Yep.
It's as I think the quote he said, as an executive, but more so as a son. So I think that there's this perception of Charlie out there that he's this guy that came in and just doesn't really know hockey and is not really that passionate, but he's pretty passionate about this organization,
Yep.
and I got a genuine sense of that. But and speaking to him, and he was clearly his support of Sweeney and Neely was unwavering. So you knew that they weren't going anywhere. And I think Sweeney does deserve a shot. I look at that trade deadline, and that was obviously tough for a lot of people in that organization to see,
Yep.
Marchand leave, and Charlie, spoke about being at the draft table when they drafted Marchand, and, he's had a close relationship with him. But I think if you look at the haul the Bruins got back, I mean, if we were talking before the trade deadline and you told me you get a second-round pick for Trent Frederick, I think people would have been like, "You're crazy. You're not getting it. He's having a terrible year."
Yeah.
They got a second-round pick for a guy that's might not even play in the playoffs for Edmonton because he re-injured his ankle.
Yep.
They got a second-round pick for Charlie Coyle, and another guy who I think hope can play center next year in Middlestat. They got a first-round pick for Brandon Carlo and a fourth-round pick and
a good prospect.
Toronto's best prospect.
Yep.
And the pick for Marchand is yet to be determined because we'll see what happens. But I think they got a lot of assets back in that trade deadline, and I think that Sweeney deserves the chance to do something with those assets, whether it's pick somebody or package them up and make a major trade. I'm interested to see how that summer plays out.
Yeah, I am too. And you're absolutely right. Like, they've put themselves in a position to be major players this summer, whichever direction they want to go. They've put themselves in a position where I think they're going to be no lower than fifth in the draft lottery, trying to get a high first-round pick, which means, roughly like a 10% chance, I think, of getting the first overall pick. Like, they've put themselves in a pretty good spot with everything that they've done to really have, a slam bang off season that's going to set them up for maybe a 1 to 2 year sort of build back up and a retool. Like that's basically what it took the Capitals, was a couple of years to get back to where they are now from trading Orlov Hathaway, where they basically made the determination, kind of like the Bruins have, that they needed to trade some veterans, reshuffle the deck and get younger and get some different talent in there. The thing now though becomes like the pressure is on them to make the right decisions, to hit home runs with some of these, either this first round pick they're going to get, the free agency if they go that route, or if they package a bunch of these assets and make a trade or two to bring in young veteran players. And I think also to bring in some veteran free agent types like the Kevin Shattenkirks and the JVRs of the world to help support the leadership group, which is something that I think was definitely a little missing this year as well. There's a lot of different things that they need to do, and the pressure is on them to get it done. And at this point, I think in Don Sweeney's tenure, he's done a lot of great things as far as keeping the team competitive. The one loss and the points that he's amassed during his tenure as GM is impressive. They had a long run of making it to the playoffs. Like, you can make arguments that he put two teams in positions to win the Stanley Cup. Certainly that team that made the record-breaking regular season, like he did everything possible to load up that team and have them in the right spot, and the players just didn't get it done. But all that being said, the whole body of work that he's had, I think it's earned him the right this offseason to build it back up, especially with what he did at the deadline and doing great, amassing all those assets. But if it's another Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm kind of offseason where guys come in and they do not hit the ground running, and there's some flaws in the players, and it takes them a long while to sort of like get in tune with what's going on, like there's going to be a lot of eyes on him and people calling for a change. And I think if they can't get this retool right, I think those calls are going to be legit and are going to be correct. Mick, your thoughts just on what Charlie had to say and this offseason, and maybe the pressure that's on Don Sweeney and the job that he's done, and whether there is merit to a lot of angry Bruins fans that are calling for his job right now.
What city would they ever live in that they wouldn't call for the GM's job if they're doing it here and now? How many markets in the NHL win 50 out of 82 for almost a decade?
Right.
That's just almost unheard of. That's Scotty Bowman in Montreal kind of stuff. So the fact that the Bruins didn't win, and you've ruined my spring, I mean, this is like the oldest story in the book now. We now, not only do we now have adults that have never held a newspaper, we now have adults who have never learned what it was like to live with a team that wins only once in a blue moon. And it's getting harder and harder in a league that continues to expand against its best interests. As an aside to the Greg Hill situation, I did tune in to EEI while I was up in the wee hours of the morning in my car, and Wiggy suggested that maybe somebody from food services is resigning. So I thought that was rather timely that the Bruins gave souvenir ice cube trays last night.
Oh, is that what you were fiddling around with there, Mick? I thought you were eating a bag of chips.
Yeah, I know. It's a little early for me and chips. Maybe I would have gotten out like the old
I thought it was a Jello shot,
crumb cakes or something,
Yeah.
Some sort of coffee cake kind of thing would have been more my
That's
speed.
probably what the players were doing with them after the final game was over last night, Jim.
Yeah. Speaking of
Jello
Charlie,
shots
speaking of Charlie Jacobs, who's
Yep.
and he's a chip off the old block when it comes to taking this very personally. Don't mess with the old man when he's on his armchair watching the Bruins, I think that's one of the most untold stories because he likes to stay out of the limelight. But that's the truth. They care. They've always cared. And Charlie cares.
Charlie told me that his dad still watches every game and calls him the next day because they want to debrief. And if he can't get Charlie, he calls Cam. And if he can't get Cam, he calls Charlie back because he wants to debrief, what went on in the game and his suggestions and feedback. So I believe him when he says his dad still is very passionate about the team.
Oh, I believe it. And I believe, and having covered this team all this time, like I can see up close how invested Charlie Jacobs is now and has always been. And really, this sort of golden age of the Bruins, this last golden age of the last 15 plus years or so, when we've covered the team, they had great players. They went to Stanley Cup finals. They won the cup in 2011. It very much coincided with Charlie Jacobs becoming much more active as the CEO and as, the principal of the Boston Bruins. Like this all started, he basically started getting involved right around when, that 2007, 2008, maybe even a little bit before that, but it was right around that time he was getting more heavily involved, and the Bruins really went on an upswing and just went through a very long run of success, of great players coming through, of it being a model franchise, of doing improvements to the Garden, like all kinds of different stuff that, like, think about like all the area around the Garden now and how different it is. The food court area in the front, like all the stuff that they've done on site as well, in addition to the actual team on the ice, to be like one of the best in class in the NHL. And a lot of that stuff is Charlie Jacobs behind the scenes, like pushing for a lot of it. And I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves for being like, behind the scenes and making a lot of this happen. Cause I don't think, Jim, to your point, he likes to take a lot of the credit, and he wants to be, front and center, always like saying this was us and we did this. Like they just are great stewards and owners of the franchise, and they have been for a long time.
To your point about the buildup, like he was saying to me, like they have a front door. That stadium has a front door now. Like,
yeah,
they never really used to. It was like, where do you go in? Now everyone knows where they're in. There's Orr's statue is there. It's a clear front door, and it's really a destination now. It's not just, hey, let's go to North Station to watch a game. Like you can go and have dinner. You can go and, not too far away from shopping. Like it's a great place now.
And we're all old enough to remember when it used to be like the underpass for the highway. It was like just dark, like roads over Causeway Street. And it was
like a Batman movie.
It looked like some place you would dump dead bodies. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And you had the Green Line trolley going, the elevated track going across in the front, and it just was
dripping rancid water.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I remember all that. I was a kid during those days, but I absolutely remember it very vividly.
We called it charming for a long time, didn't we?
Yes. All right, we're going to take a break real quick in the podcast to give some love to our friends at Game Time with the final stretch run here for the NBA and the Bruins done. Now is the time to dig into the Game Time ticket app with the Red Sox here too. Get your Red Sox tickets. The app is super easy to use and has tons of great features for sports, comedy, concerts, theaters, and all kinds of other tickets. A lot of great features, last minute deals, save up to 60% when buying last minute for sports, comedy, concerts, etc. at Game Time. There's priority. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, which filters out the fluff and only gives you good deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, everything. All in pricing, toggle this feature. It shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at the checkout, and don't we hate surprise fees? Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. I think with the Celtic, obviously the Bruins are not making the playoffs, but with the Celtics on the cusp of another long playoff run, Game Time is where you want to go for the Celtics tickets. It always takes me back to going with my dad, and he had a hookup where he would actually, the team manager for the Celtics would bring in their boom boxes. This is in the 1980s, way back when, to my dad's work. He had a service center where they would repair stuff. And if he could get it ready for them to get it on the road when the Celtics were going on a road trip, he would get Celtics tickets. So my dad actually got Celtics tickets for helping facilitate the boom boxes getting fixed for all the 1980s Celtics. So there were times where I was sitting on the folding chairs on the parquet, the folding wooden chairs they used to put out for playoff games and stuff like that. So I have very vivid Celtics playoff memories from the glory days with Bird, Mikhail Parrish, all those guys. Make your own vivid memories now by going to these Celtics playoff games and maybe catching a little history if they can win again this year. In order to do that, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Sorry, Mick, they changed the slogan, so now it's not what time is it, game time.
Game time.
I know you're bummed about that. All right. Let's talk about Morgan Geeky, guys. I think this is an interesting one, definitely appropriate with him winning the 7th player award. He six goals in 6 straight games to end the season. I did the numbers. I think it was 51 games since December 4th. He had 31 goals and 51 points, I think, or something like that. A ridiculous run he went on since early December, and really put himself in a position as a restricted free agent to make a lot of money this offseason and get himself a really good contract. It's interesting. I had talked to some people too, and they had mentioned to me that there was actually some kind of a contract offer from the Bruins that was, fairly modest at the beginning of this season that he turned down, and he kind of bet on himself, and rightfully so. Like, he ended up struggled for a while, didn't look good, but he turned around in the second half. And what's that?
I wonder if that led to that struggle, like the decision to not take that contract. And I wonder if he was, maybe a second stuff and it gets in your head a little bit.
100%.
He came out of it. He came 100%. Out of it.
I'm sure it fed into that. Like, you're feeling all the pressure now. Like, did I make the wrong decision? Like, all that stuff. Yep. But to his credit, absolutely turned it around. I think the coaching change had something to do with it too. He was scratched 5 times in the first 20 games of the year by Jim Montgomery. Mick, your thoughts just on Morgan Geeky's season, what you think he's going to get in the offseason, and how you think it's going to play out. Going to be interesting. He's got arbitration rights. We all know how that's went with Jeremy Swayman when he had arbitration rights and he was a restricted free agent. Going to be interesting to see how they treat it this time around, and if they've learned anything from the last time.
Well, of the many things that went wrong for the Bruins coming out of the gate, and many did, one of the ones that doesn't get discussed a lot was Jim Montgomery's hesitation to pluck Morgan Geeky and Trent Frederick into specific permanent roles, permanent quotes. So they didn't really get solid situations. And I asked him during camp, is this because you consider them so jack of all trades kind of players that you feel like you can wait and see what's needed when you get the rest of your questions solved? And he said, that's it. He confirmed my suspicion. But in Geeky's case, it obviously did not work out well because he struggled to start. And I think he was hesitant on the ice. And I hadn't really considered much about what Jim just brought up, but it makes a ton of sense. Yep. But I think I add that with the fact that he didn't have a specific set of instructions, but it was sort of like, okay, you stand here and wait while I'm figuring the rest of this out. I think his season just didn't get off to a good start. And I also think there was a bit of an epiphany here. He is basically the new Mike Knuble. He's a right-handed shot who found his home on the left wing. There are certain players, wingers, who thrive on the off wing more than others do. Steve Hines was one of those guys. Knuble was a fantastic example of it. And Morgan Geeky is the latest revelation in this regard. Michael Ryder, it was that kind of player, and he came to Boston that way because Claude Julien knew it, had him in Montreal, and probably stumped for his acquisition. So Geeky is definitely a left wing. He can play second line center for the Bruins in a pinch like he did matching up against the Florida Panthers in the playoffs last year. And he played well. And so this guy's an incredibly versatile athlete. So for him to find a way to repair his season amidst the chaos of this Bruins campaign that's went so far off the rails in so many dimensions, it's just an incredible season by him. And now he's in a great spot. So credit to him. He's a keeper.
Yeah, he is. And, one of his strengths, obviously, is shooting the puck. And if you're going to be a right shot left wing, that's going to open you up for a lot of one-time opportunities. And I think we've seen him take full advantage of that. And he has the shot to be able to score and take advantage of that. And Pasta's now looking for him in that particular situation. So, some of the tools and the things that he brings to the table really allow him to have success playing his off wing like that. And you also know, Mick, that anytime you mention Mike Knuble, it's going to put me in a happy place because that was one of the best guys to cover back in the day. He was such a good person in addition to being a great player on those Joe Thornton and Glenn Murray Bruins teams.
Even though he made the play that ended the Bruins sequel season.
Yes, even though I'm gonna forgive him for that, Mick. Jim, interesting kicking around sort of like the numbers. Obviously, I don't care who you are. You score 30 goals in the NHL, you're going to be known as a 30-goal scorer. Like, that's a magical number where people view you a little differently if you can get there. So there's definitely going to be some money set aside for him because he got to 30 goals. You get paid if you can score like that. And 6'3", 210, plays a pretty rugged style where he's got a lot of second and third effort wins on pucks. And like, I think he's the kind of guy that can have success in the playoffs and the regular season because he's got that rugged side to his game, and he's got good size and strength. And obviously he can shoot the puck. Last weekend, I don't know if you were in Pittsburgh or not, but
Nope.
they were talking on TNT about his contract between periods, or maybe it was after the game. And Brian Boucher was talking about it a little bit. And he had mentioned he thought that Morgan Geeky had put himself in the 5 years, $5 million a year range, 5 years, $25 million, or even 5 years, 6 perhaps. But he made $2 million the last 2 years, 2 year, $4 million contract. I think he's put himself in the 5x5 kind of neighborhood with the season that he's had, and how important he is now to the Bruins because he's got good chemistry with Pastrnak. And I feel like that's the kind of level of contract that the Bruins are going to have to get to in order to sign him.
Yeah, I was thinking 5.5, 5
Yep.
years, $5.5 million a year, something in that neighborhood. Just to
Yep.
go back to Knuble for a second, his son just won the national championship with Western Michigan. He's on that team.
Right.
Yes.
Got that. Yeah.
I digress. But yeah, Geeky, they've obviously got money to spend this summer, and they have to have earmarked some for him. And, to Mick's point about not having a solid role for him and Frederick at the beginning of the year as Monty kind of figured things out. When Geeky was asked last night about Sacco, he kind of made, reference to that, like, what he liked about Sacco and the fact that he said, here's your spot. Here's your line. I know he did change it with Elias and Zaka, last half dozen games or so. But I think he took a lot of comfort in knowing that he was going to be on that left wing, pretty much permanently. And that gave him, not only comfort, but confidence. And you saw the benefits of it. He was terrific on the power play. He developed great chemistry with Pasta, who he calls Dave, which cracks me up because he's probably the only guy in that locker room that calls him Dave.
Yes.
And he got the confidence to shoot that shot that you mentioned earlier. Like he has a great shot, and I think at times he was hesitant to unleash it. And when he finally got the confidence to do it, you saw it. Like even that goal last night was an absolute laser.
Yep.
I remember he had like a back scratching slap shot goal last year. And I did a whole story on it because you just never see guys like wind up and take those slap shots anymore. And he has it. So he has that in his arsenal. So good player.
Yeah, he is. And it's gotten to a point where Pastrnak is looking for him. And that was from pretty far out, that goal that he scored last night. Like, that's two wingers that have very good chemistry together, where they're looking for each other and they know where they like the puck, where he's going to be able to really lay into it and hammer it. Like that. And this is kind of part of the value I thought that Tyler Bertuzzi had to the Bruins too a few years ago when they were talking about keeping him, is finding somebody that can play with Pastrnak and he can bring the best out of him and vice versa, and he can really like set up the other guy. That's invaluable. Like, and I agree with you. I do think it's going to be somewhere in that $5 to $6 million a year range for like a 5-year deal. Give him some security and some term, buy up some of his free agent years at a pretty reasonable cost. Like, I think it makes sense to get there. I don't sense there's going to be as much trouble with this negotiation as there was with Jeremy Swayman, because frankly, Swayman got paid more than I thought he should have. And I still continue to say that to this day, where he skipped a step with his contracts and what he should have gotten paid. And he should never have gotten that contract when he did at that point in his career. The Bruins were just kind of painted into a corner after they traded Linus Ullmark and sort of had to give him that money. Speaking of Swayman,
he ended up setting the goalie market, like, because Ottinger signed the same thing, and Linus, he got half the term, but he basically signed for the same thing too in Ottawa. So he, I don't think there's any goaltenders out there that are upset with Jeremy, but
no, the goalies aren't. But everybody else might be, but the goalies certainly are.
Yeah, but that contract kind of surprised me. But like you said, like once they traded Linus. I don't think they anticipated that going as poorly as it did.
No.
And, it was part and parcel of why that team started so slow. Like he clearly wasn't himself.
At the top of the list, really.
He really wasn't himself until the last month. Like this last month when it was, too late. Like he's played, maybe not last month, like last 2 weeks, he looked like the Jeremy Swayman of old, I thought.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
No, I agree. And Mick, like that, I when I think of things on the list of have to have this in order for the Bruins to be a much better team next year and to sort of push themselves back to where they need to be and this retool to take. Jeremy Swayman regaining his form and being consistently who he was a year ago and giving them that elite level of goaltending again is like at the top of the list. I think that's one of the most important things they have to have if they're going to be competitive again.
You assume it. It's a given. It has to be there. You got this guy for a reason. You identified him as your future for a reason. So you need him to be a reasonable facsimile of himself, of the guy that made you decide that he's that guy and not Linus Ullmark. So that goes without saying. If I may dial for 10 seconds back to Geeky, my original impression of him was kind of like a modern-day Wayne Cashman, the way the puck follows him around in his skates, even though he can even look clumsy on those skates at times. And now to see him find his home on the left wing, as did Cashman, a right-handed shot. Cashman never shot the puck quite like Morgan Geeky does. Of course, he used an old wooden stick. But bottom line, with a funny hook, by the way, that was fashioned by the old garden boards. I really like what Geeky's developed into here and how he's added this dimension to his game. The way Bergeron added a one-timer to his game and Pasta added a one-timer to his game. These guys have developed in the NHL. And I think that's another side of that coin, Joe, that you were alluding to with Swayman getting the money ahead of time. I think that's the league right now. We got to a point here where a lot of Group 2s that don't have arbitration rights started getting career open market level contracts because somewhere along the way, the GM started blinking. And maybe it's because there were too many teams in the league. I'm not sure exactly what the levers were that changed the dynamic of this. But once you identify the name of the game, because there's so many young players coming into the league, the name of the game now is identify your core pieces and then pay them what they're worth. And that's what the Bruins have been trying to do. And that's what they have to do with Geeky. Just like Yoki Haru can go to market, they have to treat Geeky the same way when it comes to negotiating. Even though Geeky is their property, he's RFA. Yoki Haru, I don't think they can afford to lose. But Geeky, I don't think you're trying to build your team here. You got your guy. Let's go. I think they have to treat it the same way as far as assigning value to this player. This is the player that he's RFA, but it almost makes no difference these days in today's NHL. They have to pay them.
No, you have a good point.
Do you think that this is the offer sheet summer? Like for years, like offer sheets were like verboten, right? Like GMs kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't sign my guy.
Well, you got the evil eye of Brian Burke.
Yeah, but the Blues signed 2 Oilers, to offer sheets last year because they knew that the Oilers were going to be over a barrel because they signed Draisaitl. They knew they had to sign McDavid this summer.
Yep.
So the Blues went in and got 2 guys that have been successful with them, and I'm wondering if that's going to start a trend where teams are just going to be like, you know what, let's start signing these offer sheets. Let's go all Glenn Wesley on other teams and. If they do, like Geeky's going to be at the top of that list, right? Like someone's going to want to sign him to an offer sheet.
Yeah, no, I if people started throwing out offer sheets, I definitely think Geeky would want to be one of those players that could receive one. There's no doubt about it. The one thing I would say that's probably against that happening is that the cap is going up so much that like teams aren't going to be in as much salary cap distress, I think, as the Edmonton Oilers were. Where the Blues were able to really take advantage of it because they just didn't have the money to spend.
They were leveraged.
I think a lot of teams are going to have the cap space to keep their own guys and sign them if they want to, and it's going to turn into an inflationary thing if they do that. But like, I listen, Jim, I have my popcorn ready every July 1st, and I want to see offer sheets all over the place. I think the fact that there's gentlemen's agreements that they don't do it, I've always been bored by that.
I think those have gone away. The league's too big now. It's too big to have a good old boy club.
Yep.
You really can't be rules within the rules anymore. They look at the way the Lightning so infamously used LTIR with Kucherov in 2021, and how every team is trying to do that now. Now nobody's saying, "Oh, look at what they're doing with LTIR." That's not a problem now. Everybody realizes that they found a way to exploit the system, and people may not like that word, but it's what they did. And now everybody's going to exploit every piece of the system. And I think that that goes with the expansion of the league. It's getting harder and harder for 32 teams to compete for one Stanley Cup. And I think that they're having to reach deeper and deeper into their hats to find a rabbit.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of unknown as to how this like rapid increase in the salary cap is going to affect things, and unintended consequences that may happen as a result of the cap going up as much as it's going to, like in successive years. And you almost wonder too if it's going to turn into the old days like it used to be before the cap, where the teams that just have the most capital are going to end up being the big winners here because they can actually spend all that money, where some of the other smaller market teams just can't spend to the cap anymore. And you feel like that is maybe the direction it's headed in, is teams like the Rangers and the Maple Leafs and maybe the Bruins are going to be able to outspend other teams again, like they used to be able to back in the old days. It's going to be interesting to see if all that happens.
It could be, yeah. I mean, Larry Brooks once asserted during the labor war that led to the 04-05 lockout that the war wasn't really the owners versus the players. It was the big market teams versus the small market teams. And that, there was a lot of validity to that perspective, considering, and now look at where this league is going. I mean, over 100 million in a couple of years. I think it's a good point. Friedman brought this up on 32 Thoughts. There might be some teams that are going to have to, or showing kind of some decisions they're making right now that may be indicators that, listen, we're not going to keep pace with this.
Right. And that's what instituted the salary cap in the first place, is how much obscene amounts of money some of those teams were spending. All right, we're going to take another quick break right here. For those of you listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those of you watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all of this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right. I have a little bit of the other side of the coin here for you guys. Another message from this would sound like a little bit more of a disgruntled Bruins fan here. Jim, have you heard from any of these disgruntled Bruins fans?
My inbox is pretty full right now.
Yes, mine too. All right. This is from Crondog77. Joe, I guess sort of a question here, but with the inability to develop enough of these guys, Sweeney has been too reliant on outside trades, and if people still stick with this premise of what it takes to be a Bruin and all that nostalgic crap that nobody cares about, they can't do that consistently or sustain it when it's constant free agents in and out the door every 1 to 2 years. It was fine when you had Bergeron, Chara here as a roster anchor, but the team has no identity, no leadership, no succession plan, and Sweeney has to go into the depths of his word salad Rolodex at his next press conference to identify the path forward. So what is the plan? Do they want to be fast and skilled, or big or bad, or some combo of both? And that's from Crondog77. Your thoughts on all of that, Jim? And obviously there's a lot of unhappy Bruins fans out there that are going to have some pointed words about the way things have been run and how you can't do things now like you used to. And there is a point there that you can't necessarily try to build the team like you did when you had Zdeno Chara, Patrice Bergeron, like Hall of Fame level players, where you're maybe not at that level anymore. And certainly you're not going to be able to build down the middle like you used to with Krejci and Bergeron as your centers and Chara as your number one defensive stopper. You're going to have to build it a different way now. But just your thoughts on unhappiness with the Bruins front office, unhappiness that they're going to be back next year, and people like clamoring for change right now.
Yeah, I think people are really still bitter about the Panthers loss, right, 2 years ago. And I think that's what kind of clouds their judgment. I think they do kind of forget that this franchise, like you look at the Red Wings, what is it, 9 straight years have been out of the playoffs? I mean, if that happened here, wow. But this is one time in 9 years, and people are clamoring. So I get it. I get the passion, and I understand it. But I think Sweeney, like we had touched on earlier, deserves a chance to right the ship, right?
Yep.
And if you look back at last July 1st, like he got hammered throughout the year for the Lindholm contract and the Zadorov contract. But I think if you looked at it last year going into free agency, they needed a 200-foot center, and the consensus best one on the market was Elias Lindholm. They got him.
Yep.
They needed another physical defenseman. One of the best ones on the market was Zadorov. They got him.
Yep.
So I think they were the right pieces. Now, you could argue that they paid too much for them, but
that's free agency, though. Like, you're going to overpay in free agency for players. That's what part of the problem of going to free agency for a lot of these solutions is. It's an overpay. It always will be.
And I find that a lot of the people that, like, it's revisionist history, like they love those moves at the time, but those players didn't live up to that contract. So now it's like, why did we sign those guys? Well, what were you saying in July when they did sign them? So it's tough. But I would expect both those guys to have bounce back years. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think Zadorov did play well after Christmas.
Yep.
Pretty well, especially considering the injuries on the back end. But does going with Pasta and Geeky, reignite Lindholm's game? From a small sample size of a half dozen games, it looks like that could be a possibility.
Yeah.
And maybe you've solved that problem, and Zacha can flourish on another line.
Yeah, what we saw towards the end of the year has to have you encouraged that both of those players are going to be much better in year 2, because they were much better in the second half of year 1. Like Zadorov, Jokiharju, when they traded for him and Zadorov and Jokiharju became a pairing, they were both very good, and it brought out the best in Zadorov's game. And there might be hockey scholars out there that someday like break down the film and study how Zadorov got a plus 22 or whatever it was for the season on a team with a minus 50 goal differential. I think that the closest to him on the roster is like somebody else was plus 4. So clearly he was doing some things right, even though, he took a ton of penalties. There were definite prominent mistakes with the puck at certain times during the year that were costly. But I also think part of why you're paying Zadorov is what he can bring to you in the playoffs too. Just that physical element, that intimidation element. Like, he scares the crap out of players on the other team. And I think you pay through the note. You have to pay for that. You have to have that on your team. And you're going to take some of the flaws and the mistakes he makes. Lindholm, it finally, after not really looking like he had gelled anytime he had played with Pasternak during the season, and that's originally what they wanted to go way back when on the first day of training camp, and it never really happened. They look good. They look good in the last half dozen games, and Lindholm, I thought 4 nations on, I thought he was a much better player. I really did, and it makes me wonder why we didn't see that guy more in the first 3, 4, 5 months of the season. But also. Like, he's a guy that seems to take a little while to sort of get comfortable when he's in a new environment. It was like that with Vancouver when he got traded there the year before. So we'll see. But Mick, how high are your levels of optimism that both of those players are going to be better next year?
Oh yeah, I feel like they kind of got better now. I'm glad we got to see it before the season ended. And the naysayers will say, yeah, well, it didn't matter. It was garbage. Yeah, I know that. But it's great to see them get their ship together at the end of the season. And next fall, I expect them to build on that momentum, especially the Lindholm in the case of the chemistry that he has as the two-way conscience of the Pasta Geeky line. So I think that's a terrific development and something that we can. I feel like the Zadorov thing really hinges on Jokiharju. As far as our texter, was it Robert Cron or was it Nicholas
Crondog 77?
Okay, so as far as his idea that there's no succession plan, post March 7th, David Pasternak, his body of work and his presentation to us his accountability to the media, his balls through the wall play on the ice, and leadership and competitiveness, to me, was an incredible statement of a compelling interview for the captaincy. And for me to not give it to him at beginning of next season would really, there's got to be a hell of a reason if you don't. And so I do anticipate a July 1 acquisition of a veteran winger who could probably wear the other A and come in as that kind of player, a guy in his 30s who's going to help. I don't know if he's going to be Mark Recchi old, but he's got to be that kind of player who can really kind of help strengthen, fortify the culture that they need going forward here with all the young talent that's going to be developing on the job. So that's how I look at that. They love their centers who can also play wing and make them interchangeable parts. But I do think they need two guys who are going to play wing, one on the right, one on the left, to augment this roster. Beyond that, I feel like the team is just about decided.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on Pastrnak and his leadership after the trade deadline. I think the only way he doesn't get the C is if he says he doesn't want it. You know, I don't know if he wants that burden, but he's certainly proved that he can handle that job, and I give him a ton of credit for standing up in front of us every time he was asked and talking, and being on the road with them a lot. Sometimes he was the only really guy you wanted to talk to, and he always honored the request to speak.
And there it is. The Boston Globe was the only. Until what, the Detroit game was the only media outlet at every Bruins game this season. So in fairness to the old standby, the Globe, that you guys did that, and that's terrific that somebody still does in today's world, and they, but I thought Pasta was the perfect conduit from Sacco to the players because the personality that Joe Sacco tried to exude, keep everybody pushing forward, keep people realizing that no matter what your motivation is, what your career station is, your situation with your contract, everybody's got reason to be motivated. Let's find what that is. Let's tap into it. And I just am amazed with the job he did with this team, considering all that its problems and its limitations, and keeping them feeling positive and keeping guys continuing to push. And I think that's what we saw from the masses. And I think Pasta was sort of, his arm reaching onto the ice as far as that goes. And to me, that's your perfect captain.
Yeah. And he backs it up with his play. That's what you need, is somebody that is going to back it, walk the walk and talk the talk. And I think Pastrnak is the perfect example of that. And that he goes out and performs, and he did it all the way to the very end, even though they were playing meaningless games at the end. He was still playing extremely hard right up until the end, leading by example. And, I do think he wants to be the captain. I do think he wants to wear the C, because that's the way he was acting down the stretch here. Once the captain was gone, he stepped into that role, and you could tell he felt the responsibility. He wanted the responsibility, and he filled it very well. And he showed you what it's going to look like if he's the captain of this team next year and moving forward. And I do think, based on his accountability, based on always being there to answer the bell one way or the other, win, lose, or draw after games, setting an example on the ice with the way that he played, he showed a ton of captainly qualities towards the end of the season.
I kind of liken it to so I covered the Patriots for a number of years, and I kind of liken it to Tom Brady. Like, when your best player is a guy that's going balls to the wall on every shift, and every time, like, everybody in that locker room has to look at themselves and say, well, if he's working that hard, if he's playing that hard, what excuse do I have not to? And people fall in line. And I think those younger players that, and there were a lot of them that came up from Providence this year, when they see the way David Pastrnak practices and how he carries himself in the locker room and how he carries himself with us when we talk to him, and the message that he sends, how can they not fall in line?
Yeah, it sets the standard for everybody else organizationally, and that's what a good captain should do. And that's, you see all that, and you say that it makes sense for him to wear the C, just based on what we saw the second half of the year, certainly after Marchand got traded away. And there was a bit of a vacuum leadership-wise there. All right, let's wrap this up with the final talking point here. Fraser Minton scored his first goal with the Bruins down the stretch. Fabian Lysell scored his first NHL goal, had a great play last night, using his speed to win a race and a battle to get a puck that set up the game-tying goal. John Farinacci scored his first NHL goal in that game last night. A lot of good moments for young players to sort of, keep them hungry and get them going over the summer, going into next year. Which young players, Jim, left the biggest impression on you and make you feel like they're going to be a part of the picture here next year?
I think the two guys you mentioned off the top, Lysell and Minton, I thought Lysell's speed finally showed up. Like the first, I don't know, half dozen to 7 or 8 games, you could tell he had skill, but I think he was timid as he got used to trying to maybe find his role. But I thought the last 4 games, and I think he had points in 3 of his last 4 games, he really played well. And that play you mentioned last night, I think that was against, if I'm not mistaken, was it Dumoulin? Yeah, I think it was Dumoulin that he went around and ended up feeding the puck out front. Like, that's a veteran defenseman, and this is a kid with 11 games under his belt. So I think if he has that confidence, and I don't know if he ever had that during training camp, because I think the roles were kind of, or all the jobs were kind of spoken for. If he goes in there with a really competitive fire, I think he could be the guy that Bruins fans have been clamoring for since they made him the 21st pick back in 21. And Fraser Minton, everything I've seen from him, big kid, not afraid to get physical, and plays a 200-foot game, and that could be a real steal as part of that Carlo trade, because I think that the Maple Leafs had high expectations for him, but he was caught in a numbers game up in Toronto. He just couldn't get into the lineup, and it wasn't because he didn't deserve it. There was just no room for him because they have so many talented forwards up there. But those two guys, I think, come in and grab spots because there'll be jobs available.
Yeah, look, I've been a very vocal critic of, I like Fraser Minton a lot. I liked his game from the very first game I saw him play, and he gets in the middle of the ice. He gets into the high battle areas and the danger areas. He's not afraid. He's got a good ability to finish. Like, he's not going to be a huge goal scorer, but like, he's a good two-way player and could be like a third line center type for sure, like for a long period of time with a little bit of upside.
Good size too.
Yeah, great size. But Fabian Lysell, I've been very vocal about, very critical of. Had not liked what I'd seen in a lot of different viewings of him over the years. But I totally agree that like he looked tentative at the beginning. He looked afraid to make a mistake at the beginning. He was not assertive when he first came up. And like a player like him can't play that way. He's got to be assertive, aggressive, use his speed, push the envelope, like force the issue, use those assets to put the other team on their heels and make plays. And he really started to show that towards the end of this run, and at least gives you pause to see what he's going to look like after the summer and in training camp next year, and think he may be able to challenge for a spot next year based on the way that he looked at the end of this year. So there's some optimism there where I think people were like really quick to call him a bust or say he wasn't going to be able to play. I never really went that far, but I just didn't like what I'd seen out of him and wondered if he was ever going to get there. And at least I've seen some games now, Mick, where you've seen something out of him to say, okay, I see what they saw. I see how he can be effective at the NHL level. If he can continue to hone that and be consistent with that guy we saw in the last few games here down the stretch, maybe they've got something.
I think the one thing that keeps him out of the NHL right now for the beginning of next season is moments like last night when they led 1-0 and he was forechecking and he cut around the Devils net and he reached full extension to hook the Devils defenseman breaking out the puck, and the Devils scored on the power play, and the momentum, they scored 30 seconds after that, and suddenly the Bruins are down 2-1. We'll care about those results in the fall. Today, last night, it was kind of like, oh, what a relief, they're losing. No, like the next fall, that's going to be a real problem. And this guy's now have 3 professional seasons under his belt, and he's still doing stuff they're supposed to unlearn halfway through their first year. So if he doesn't make it, that's going to be why. But you're right. everything else he's showing right now shows a guy who's maturing into his body and able to skate and compete with these grizzled veterans and make plays. And because he's got a rare talent, and what a tragedy it would be if stupid stuff like that gets in his way. And that's kind of where the fork in the road is for him. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to get that out of him, because it's still there. And Ryan Mougenel is an excellent hockey coach, and they've done their best with this guy. So we'll see what happens. As far as Minton goes, I know I'm going to sound like, stop it, Colageo, you're jinxing the kid and everything else. But I'm looking at him and hearing people say the same things they said about Patrice Bergeron at age 20. It was a guy who snuck on to the team, and the year before the lockout was not expected to make it, played third line, right wing. And, his English will get better. And we think he's really thinks the game well. I mean, this guy's a left-handed Bergeron right now. What will his upside be? I don't know. But I'm like giddy. I'm giddy over Minton.
Clearly, if you're comparing him to Patrice Bergeron, you are definitely giddy.
I like
the
that.
Fraser Minton trade. Are you seeing shades of Patrice Bergeron, Jeff?
I wasn't willing to go there, but I like. Me
neither.
I certainly like Mick's enthusiasm. I'll tell you one other guy I'm interested in. How does Matt Poitras react and rebound from this season, where all these guys got called up at the end of the season? He wasn't one of them, and I think that's because they've seen him, right? They've seen 66 games of him, so they know. But when training camp opens, has he improved? His physicality and his awareness with the puck. When camp opens, a lot of times he just held on to the puck too long and he'd end up getting clobbered, and he needed to get that out of his game. But by all reports, he's gotten a lot better at Providence. So I want to see that translation this summer.
I think a lot of Boston Bruins media are going to go to some Providence Bruins playoffs.
Oh, I'm sure I'll see you down there at the Providence Bruins playoffs, both of you, because I'll definitely be down there.
Hopefully it lasts more than the 2 out of 3 opening round.
Yeah. Don's Lockmillis, too. Let's give him some credit. The UMass kid that they drafted and they just signed has been tearing it up in Providence since he signed and came down there. So they're going to have a stacked deck in Providence. They should have a nice long playoff run because they've got a lot of talent that's going to be on.
Has Gasso made a decision yet?
No, I don't believe so.
Now here's a guy who's kind of like in the Dalton Bancroft category. He's coming out of Dalton Bancroft, 24 years old, to be 25 next year. He's a guy who the Bruins won the battle between. A lot of teams are interested in that kid, and now because he's an old prospect, so it's got to happen kind of right away. Gasso is either going to be captain of BC and play top line center, or is he going to be a third line right winger with the Bruins? These are interesting times. I think the Bruins have a lot of prospects now.
They do. And to Jim's point, I think Matt Poitras is going to be ready to compete for an NHL job next training camp. And I still think of him more highly than I think of Lysell and even Fraser Minton, to be honest with you. I think they made a very conscious decision that bringing him up and putting him down and his time at the NHL level, it kind of hurt his development a little bit. And they wanted him to just play a lot of minutes, play in all situations, really build up the confidence and figure some things out. And to Jim's point, get some stuff out of his game that was hampering him and he was having problems with at the NHL level. But I still think they're very high on him. And I think he should go into training camp next year with sky high confidence and have ironed out some of the things that he needed to work on and develop, which it's much easier to do if you're a kid like that at the AHL level and figure it out there and make mistakes there where you're not under the microscope like you are at the NHL level. And I think being up here had kind of hurt him a little bit. And I mean, there's an argument to be made that Mason Lowry, same kind of issues, it's same kind of things where the mistakes are so magnified up here. I think he's a confident kid, so it doesn't really bother him as much, but still that's a very difficult way to develop as an NHL player and to be a high-end, high-impact guy like they want both of those players to be. So it's gonna be interesting to see what all this.
Poitras, the AHL playoffs is a huge thing for Poitras this year, because that could really be a development, kind of a grenade for him to get, really kind of explode his confidence and put him in a much better stead to nail down that third line center spot in Boston next fall. which could affect where Minton plays, because I'm pretty confident he's going to play top 9.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Mick and Jim, thank you very much. Let's also thank our sponsor. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase for any kind of tickets, concerts, comedy, theater, definitely Celtics tickets for the NBA playoffs. Get on board for all of that. Terms do apply, but again, create an account at Game Time on the app and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Mick, Jim, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. Great
Thanks,
to
Joe.
see you, Jim.
Good to
You
see
too,
you.
man.
Good to see both of you guys. Everybody else out there, thank you for listening. We'll see you at the rink.